You have the floor.
فتحت الصوت.
Yeah.
Mr. President, Xie. Let me start by thanking you and your friendly country, the People's Republic of China, for presiding over the work of the Council in these difficult and exceptional circumstances, and for China's efforts in assisting 89 member states of our organization affected by the emerging COVID-19 pandemic. In a true embodiment of the values and meanings of international cooperation, humanitarian feeling, and impartial implementation of the responsibility of the Presidency of the Council in maintaining international peace and security under the provisions of the Charter. I would like to express to the member states inside as well as outside the Council our hope to jointly overcome the catastrophic repercussions of this pandemic. This pandemic has united our peoples away from the efforts of some governments to create a rift between them and revealed the fragility of the international structures that have existed since the end of the Second World War and their inability to serve humanity and mankind. In this context, my delegation reiterates its strong condemnation of the unilateral economic coercive measures used by some governments of member states of this organization as a weapon in their sinful war against my country and on other member states as well, which prevent, among other things, the Syrians and their medical healthcare workers from obtaining their basic needs to prevent this pandemic and dealing with possible cases of infection, as well as preventing the provision of food needs and basic services to Syrians. Persistence of imposing these unjust coercive measures that violate international law, the Charter of the United Nations and the human rights instruments, and not responding to our repeated requests to end them, the most recent of which is contained in the joint letter sent by the permanent representatives of 8 countries: China, Cuba, DPRK, Nicaragua, Iran, Russia, Syria, and Venezuela, to His Excellency the Secretary General on the 25th of March 2020, demonstrate once again what we have always emphasized in terms of hypocrisy that some have adopted in dealing with the humanitarian situation in my country and other countries as well. In this regard, my delegation welcomes the prompt, positive response of the Secretary General to this initiative of the 8 countries above mentioned. Mr. President, my country received recently a number of high-ranking officials of international organizations partnering with the Syrian government in humanitarian work, including Mrs. Henrietta Fore, UNICEF Executive Director, and Mr. David Paisley, Executive Director of the World Food Programme, and Mr. Peter Maurer, the President of the International Committee of the Red Cross. The discussions with them were positive and included stressing the pursuit of joint cooperation in a manner consistent with the principles of non-politicized humanitarian action and the willingness of the Syrian government to facilitate access to all parts of the country from within Syrian territory and through a mechanism that includes, alongside the Syrian state, both the United Nations and the Syrian Arab Red Crescent Association, to ensure that aid reaches those who deserve it and that it does not reach terrorists. My country has affirmed to its partners the necessity to compel the Turkish regime and its affiliated terrorist groups to stop their crimes and to enable the Syrian civilians detained by these terrorist organizations in some areas of Idlib to return to their homes in areas liberated from terrorism, and to provide immediate assistance to them from inside Syria and support national efforts to normalize life once again. My country, Mr. President, stresses that it is unacceptable to allow the terrorist-sponsoring Turkish regime to take advantage of the suffering of the Syrian refugees and to use them as a bargaining card to blackmail Europe and pressure the European governments to support this regime militarily under the umbrella of NATO, or to give it advantages and privileges of the European Union countries. It is also unacceptable to tolerate the Turkish regime's support for terrorism and to transfer publicly, without shame, terrorists from Idlib to Libya and to other countries, after it had transferred several years ago many terrorists from Libya to Syria. And we complained about this many times in the past. My delegation again draws the kind attention of the Security Council to the fact that the doors of Syria are wide open to receive Syrian refugees to return to their homeland, and that the Syrian state has created all conditions to ensure a dignified return to them. In this context, we condemn the prevention by the American forces and their affiliated terrorist gangs, which occupy Al Tanf area, in which the Rukban camp is located, of the return of displaced persons in the camp to their chosen areas of residence. The Syrian government reaffirms its full readiness to facilitate their return and rid them of the inhuman conditions in which they live and the exploitation of American occupation forces and their tools, which claim that they are unwilling to return. This is false information, by the way. Mr. President, the terrorist organizations supported by the Turkish regime still impose their control on some areas of Idlib governorate. In this context, I draw your kind attention to the content of paragraph 15, 16, and 17 of the 25th report of the Analytical Support and Sanctions Monitoring Team issued in document S/2020/53. I'm referring here to your own subcommittee report. Mr. President, on Monday, March the 16th, 2020, these terrorist organizations, supported by the Turkish occupation forces, attacked the facilities of humanitarian NGOs in the cities of Idlib and Ariha in northwest of Syria, looting and seizing their assets and assaulting their volunteers. In my letter sent to your good self on March 24th, 2020, I conveyed to you that Erdogan's regime and its terrorist proxies continue to use water as war weapon against civilians in Al-Hasaka city and surrounding congregations northeast of Syria. It keeps cutting off the water from Al-Luk station and its wells, which prevents millions Syrian civilians, the majority of which are children and women, from drinking water. This is a war crime, especially in the time we all are trying to avoid the spread of COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, some member states and OCHA were dead silent in dealing with such information, while they broke all hell loose because of alleged rumors of Ghazi Intab office, which became the hub for terrorist organizations and their supporting countries, with the sole aim of tarnishing the image of the Syrian government. Mr. President, in the phone call between the Syrian and the Russian presidents on March the 6th, 2020, my government welcomed the achievements of the Russian leadership on March the 5th that adds to the efforts aiming to guarantee the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria, expressed in the latest agreement. Furthermore, the agreement stressed the necessity of combating terrorism. The Syrian government has been fully committed to all ceasefire agreements that were concluded previously, and this also applies to the recent Moscow agreement concerning Idlib. Although we do not trust the Turkish part that has not honored the 2-year-old Astana agreements, nor Sochi agreement that was concluded a year and a half ago. Before Moscow agreement, we are looking forward to the full and timely implementation of Moscow agreement by the Turkish regime's terrorist groups, since it has guaranteed their commitment. Mr. President, Mr. Peterson has just conveyed to you that the Syrian national delegation accepted his agenda to continue the work of the Constitutional Committee. Thus, the other party no longer has any excuse to evade its responsibilities, especially that its empty maneuvers and futile attempts were behind the impediment of the Constitutional Committee work. We were also informed that during the last period, the Syrian national delegation has suggested many proposals for an agenda according to the rules of procedures, but they were all rejected without any explanation, which led to the disruption of the committee's third session until now. Mr. President.